And we're back, the final installment of our visit to the Melbourne jail. We left off with executions. This panel lists by name, date, country, age, those executed at the Melbourne jail. A name that you would see if you check the year 1880 is none other than this man, Ned Kelly. What an amazing story. Let me rephrase that. What an amazing set of stories. There are multiple versions of the story of Ned Kelly. I urge you to not take my particular version as the most accurate. I write about this in my book, Escape to Prison, and there are plenty of references to historical documents. So if you are doing a scholarly examination of Ned Kelly, I encourage you to check the historical record. There's also more sensational versions. We talked about Mick Jagger, and there are other films. And there's a lot of variation and versions in between. But let me give you the version I talk about in my book, Escape to Prison. So Ned was the son of an Irish convict who was transported from Ireland to Australia, to Tasmania. He was then emancipated, meaning he became a free citizen, if you will, in Australia. He married Ellen Quinn. She was a settler, and they had the family. She was an Irish settler. She was not a convict. Not yet. I'm foreshadowing. And Ned Kelly and his brother Dan had a gang, and they were quite keen on engaging in what is known in Australia as, they were bush rangers. They were robbing banks, and they were stealing horses and so on and so forth. But they had an aura of nobility, and that is that they oftentimes were giving their proceeds to the disadvantaged. That's part of the story. That's part of the narration of Ned Kelly. And Ned Kelly wrote a lengthy, what could be described as a manifesto. This is on display at the public library in Melbourne. So when you're in Melbourne, this is another stop along the tour of Ned Kelly. You go to the public library, and it has the document. And it was a manifesto in which he was filing a grievance, if you will. And that is that those Australians of Irish descent were treated as second-class citizens. So the plan was to emancipate, to use that word, the Irish people from the British-controlled social structure and form their own society, also in the great state of Victoria. Now that's a very brief overview of the circumstances that lead to the abduction of hostages at the inn. This is outside of Melbourne. And the plan was to lure the constables, the police, who would be on a train, come down to the inn where the Kelly gang had held the hostages. And they disabled the rails that would disable and derail the train with the police, and therefore take them out. One of the hostages escaped. He went up to where the police had congregated, and he said, "Don't take the train," because the Kelly gang had disrupted the rail line. So they snuck down on horseback, and when they arrived, this is what they saw. You can't make this up, folks. The Kelly gang had body armor. And this is on display at the Melbourne jail. This is the body armor that they had a craftsman. Each member of the Kelly gang walked out onto the veranda of the inn with guns ablazing, pistols in each hand, firing at the authorities. So there's this big shootout in dramatic fashion, as you can imagine, but the police are still trying to figure out, where does this body armor come from? And bullets are quite literally bouncing off the metal. And Ned, because he was so big, so tall, the body armor stopped short, exposing his legs. And that's what took him down. He took a bullet in the leg, disabled him. He was arrested. He was brought to the Melbourne jail, where he was held for a couple of months before he was executed. So there's a lot to read about Ned Kelly. We should also add a bookend to this story, because Ned Kelly's mother, Ellen, was also incarcerated at the Melbourne jail. Very brief story. The constable shows up to the Kelly home to arrest Dan. Dan willfully cooperates with the constable, but as the story goes, the constable on his way out tried to kiss 14-year-old Katie Kelly, and her mother pulled an iron off the ironing board and attacked the constable, smashing him in the head. So now she's tried and convicted of attempted murder. So she was incarcerated with her youngest child. And Ned and his mother were able to meet before he was then executed. She was working in the laundry at the time of his execution. He was executed on the 11th of November, 1880. I was doing my field work on the 12th of November, and I stumbled upon this memorial, fresh cut flowers, placed at the very site. Sightedness, authenticity. This is where the truth lays bare. The execution of Ned Kelly. So admirers, supporters, people who follow the legend and mythology of Ned Kelly. And this is one of the notes that was left. Let me magnify it a little bit. On this anniversary of your execution, Ned, which took place here years ago, we remember you. In the words of historian Ian Jones, we would be justified in saying that Ned Kelly, the man, was infinitely greater than his legend, a man of greater nobility, of moral courage than anything we have even hinted at in the past. We salute your courage, Ned, and understand your life and the injustices you and your class face. That's the Irish diaspora, the Irish people in Australia. May all Australians study your story. This is a living memorial. This was completely by surprise in my field work, and adds a nice bookend. But here's another bookend of this story. The death mask. That's Ned Kelly. It's a replica of his death mask, but nevertheless. After Kelly was hanged, his body remained suspended by the rope for 30 minutes. It was then removed by the head cart to the dead house, which is a mortuary. During an autopsy, his head was removed and a death mask was made. A number of casts were taken from the mold, one displayed here. That's the death mask. Now, why would they do that? Well, folks, things just get more interesting. The more you study this stuff, This is phrenology. We're going to talk about phrenology in this course too. Phrenology was a pseudoscience claiming to be able to predict character and personality traits through head-shaped bumps of the skull. It was extremely popular in the early 19th century, but interest was beginning to lessen at the time of Kelly's execution. For more detail on phrenology, etc., okay? This is phrenologist A.S. Hamilton, who studies Kelly's death mask. He requests to examine Kelly before his execution to perform an evaluation of phrenology, but his request is denied, so he has to study the death mask. And he reported that Kelly had an overdeveloped features of combativeness and destructiveness. This is by reading the bumps on the death mask, by the way. The undeveloped features included cautiousness and conscientiousness, enormous self-esteem, appear bright, dazzling, heroic. Phrenology. Let me go back to the beginning. Here's the entrance, and now we see the foreshadowed image. That's Ned Kelly in his body armor. That becomes the logo of this experience. But like all prison museums, we exit through the gift shop and just absorb, immerse yourself in all of this merchandise, all this Ned Kelly stuff. You've got bottle openers, you've got key rings, you've got little toys, you've got puzzles, posters. This is a baby bib over here. Ned Kelly Central. Exit through the gift shop. So I'm foreshadowing just one more time. Penal tourism, the dream of order, exhibiting early penology in Argentina and Australia. And that's our next stop, folks. We're going to go from Argentina to Australia. Now, that's it. Thanks for listening, and I think it's time to have a schooner.